I'm Nate Eaton here in the EastIdahoNews.com studios, chatting today with Detective Ray Hermosillo from the Rexburg Police Department and Madison County Prosecuting Attorney Rob Wood. I've waited 4 years to talk to you guys. Over 4 years.
It's been a while.
So you're going to tell all today, I hope.
We'll see.
Yeah, okay, good. Probably not all, but as much as we can get in here.
As we can get in.
First of all, how you feeling? Been about a week?
Yeah, you know, I just feel kind of jet lag, you know, but I feel great with the verdict and having it done and over with. Just slowly getting back into things. Yeah.
How about you, Rob?
Yeah, jet lag. That's a good way to say it. That's kind of how I felt. I don't know. Yesterday I felt like I had a little more energy, but yeah, that's an exhausting process. So.
Right.
But getting back into it.
I'm sure as the days go by, too, that energy will return once the routine comes back to normal. Although, has there really been a routine for the past 4.5 years? I imagine there hasn't been a day where you all haven't at least thought about this case.
Yeah, for the last 4.5 years, I mean, we really didn't work on it every day, but it was always in the back of your mind on things we needed to get done and people we needed to talk to still and things that were still outstanding.
Yeah. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, there certainly has not been a day the last 4.5 years that it hasn't probably been on the forefront of what I've been thinking about, for sure.
So let's go back to November 2019. This all started with a Jeep, right?
Yeah.
And with you, the call goes to Fremont, right? And they say, well, the Jeep might actually be in Rexburg, and they ask you to check it out.
Right. So I get a call from Fremont, and they're talking about this Jeep that was possibly involved in a homicide in Gilbert. And so after I get off the phone, you know, I go back to the police department, let the other detectives know, and yeah, we started doing surveillance at that time at Lori's apartment.
Is that when you made the contact with Chad and Alex? Or was that right after you found out about missing JJ?
So the Jeep call was November 1st, 2019, and I didn't make contact with Chad and Alex until November 26th of 2019. So it was about a month later.
And over
the call for a missing child didn't actually come in until November 25th.
Okay.
Right.
And at the time the call came in, did you know that it was associated with the Jeep?
Kind of. We knew about everything that happened in Gilbert and in Chandler at that point.
The shooting of Charles.
Right.
Things like that.
And so when Gilbert called on the 25th, I knew they were looking for JJ down in Arizona because Kay hadn't talked to JJ for a while. So they were going to check some places down there. And then when they weren't able to find JJ down there, that's when they called on the 25th.
Okay, so Rob, at what point do you get involved? Because it's not like the police call you for everything they're responding to.
November 4th.
3 days after the Jeep call.
Okay. So Ray came into my office to get a warrant for the Jeep. It was the 4th, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll never forget it because I was sitting in, I don't know that I'd call it the lobby, the front area of our office, working on a case that was actually pretty serious for us. And Ray comes in, he's like, "You want to hear a crazy story?" And he had a piece of paper with pictures of some of the people involved. And I remember there was a picture of Tylee. That's actually kind of the thing that sticks out to me the most from that. I don't think JJ was on that though.
No.
And so, and he starts kind of going through this story, and all to get to, we need to get this warrant for Gilbert.
Right.
Was Tammy on there? Like, had you put together the dots that Chad...
No, I don't believe Tammy was on there. It was just the circumstances down in Arizona.
Right.
And so they had
all the Arizona stuff.
all the players there and the Jeep and who was supposedly driving the Jeep and who it was registered to. So we had all the pictures. And they kind of told me a little bit about the story with Charles and the story with Brandon. And so when I went to get the warrant from Rob, we kind of started talking about it. I'm like, man, this is kind of a crazy thing. Little did we know it was going to get even crazier.
Right. And, so we helped get the warrant. And I think we talked about it a couple times in passing, and then I think we had to renew the warrant. But then, yeah, November 25th, he comes and he's like, this just got crazier. There's a missing kid.
That's when Kay had reached out to you all.
That's when Kay had reached out to Gilbert. And then Gilbert called us and said, hey, do me a favor. Just see if there's a little boy there by the name of J.J. Vallow. And so the next morning, it was a later evening call. So the next morning, myself and Detective Dave Hope went to Lori's place.
And that's when you had the encounter with Chad for the first time?
Yes.
And Alex?
Right.
And what was that like? Did you know he was lying right away?
You know, I knew what Alex was suspected of doing down in Arizona. And to be quite honest, it was a weird feeling talking with Alex. And I remember thinking and looking at him, and he was just staring. He had that 1,000-yard stare that made me feel uncomfortable. And when I was talking to him, he would keep taking a couple steps toward me. And, you know, I'm like, okay, well, just take a couple steps back, and I'd take a couple steps back. But it was a weird feeling talking with Alex, knowing what he had done in Arizona at that time. But initially, yeah, I knew they were lying to me.
Because you knew that Chad had married Lori.
Right.
And that Alex, and didn't they both say they didn't have her cell phone number?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, then you got to go back to Rob and ask for a warrant to go in the house.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and in between that was when Ron Ball and Dave Stubbs, Kellen went and go over and get that video now that everybody's seen, when she talks about Alex being her protector, her friend, Chad. But yeah, and then...
So as soon as I got done talking with Alex and Chad, I called Ron Ball, who was my lieutenant at the time. And I said, Ron, there's something going on with this missing little boy. I'm getting lied to, their demeanor, your gut tells you there's something more going on. And so that's when he grabbed Dave Stubbs. And Dave, thank goodness, grabbed the body cam. And they came over there, yeah.
So you go back to Rob. Rob, what are you thinking?
So they come back to me and they say she's with a friend in Arizona, and we're going to check and see. And I can't remember if they got back to me later that night or very first thing. No, it was later that night.
Later that night.
Later that night that he's not with her. Yeah, and at this point, it's just like, well, this is really strange. This is really, really strange. So we got up. We might have, I'm trying to remember when we applied for those warrants. It might have been that night. Or very first thing the next morning. Yeah, I can't remember that, actually. I guess I could go back and look, but
quickly.
very quickly we got those warrants.
Next morning, but then you all went back and they were gone.
Right. That very next morning.
Quickly.
That very next morning on the 27th, after we got the warrants, we were in his office really early in the morning, waiting for the warrants. We got the warrants that morning.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then we went and served the search warrant, and that's when we found that they had left.
So then it gets more creepy.
Got a lot more strange for sure. So we were thinking, what is going on? And in the back of our minds, we know what's going on in Arizona. And so, because we knew what was going on in Arizona, Ron Ball made a phone call to the FBI and said, this little boy may be in Arizona, he may be here, but we're going to need some assistance.
And then it went kind of quiet, at least. Well, at this point, it's not public.
Right.
The word's not out about the kids. At what point do you decide to go public with this?
Well, so we start working with the FBI, and they kind of have their, I guess, guidelines and protocols for how they do these things. And law enforcement was looking for JJ, and by the time it went public, we knew that no one had seen Tylee for a while too. And I think it was December 19th that we pushed out a press release. And that was, if I recall correctly, the FBI was saying this is what you should do. And December 19th, we pushed that out.
And when we got that, we knew something was up, because normally police press releases are like short. Sometimes there's typos, no offense. I mean, sometimes it's not the most, crafted document.
Right.
This was like a page and a half, 2 pages with the pictures, and then no one knew who these kids were in Rexburg.
Right.
So Nate, as soon as they fled and we went back to the office, and it was nonstop working, phone calls. We were on conference calls with Arizona, FBI in Arizona, Gilbert Police, Chandler. Fremont got involved because we kind of knew what was going on with Tammy's situation and Chad. So it was nonstop, 12, 13-hour days from November 27th when we served the warrant, and that continued on. But when we went public is after we had started piecing everything together through those conference calls, and we knew something wasn't right. So that's when we went public, looking for the assistance of everybody else to see if we can find these kids.
And I remember the release came out on a Friday, and then the next day the release came out with Chad and Lori's pictures. And between that Friday night into Saturday, we were getting all sorts of tips about Tammy and Charles and everything like that. And then someone says they're in Hawaii. And you all found out that they were in Hawaii. I believe it came out in the trial because you were able to track their phones.
That and tips as well through
tips.
the hotlines that we had set up.
So those of us, watching all this now might think, run over to Hawaii and arrest them, until they talk. Obviously, you can't do that. No. So what's happening behind the scenes as far as the strategy of trying to figure this out?
Well, I'd say at first, the strategy was just looking everywhere to find the kids. Right. That was the number one priority. And as more information was coming out, I think we put out another press release within a week. I can't remember the exact date. I'd have to go back and look, but I remember we said in there, we have reason to believe these children are in danger. And I remember that's a big thing to put into a press release, actually. And so a lot of thought actually went into that press release, hoping to get some attention to find these kids. And so we're going through that, and like I said, you don't just arrest people. But we find out they're in Hawaii, and so several law enforcement officers and I went over to Hawaii. At first, I wasn't planning on going, and then the prosecutor in Kauai at the time requested that I go over to help with the legal process on all the paperwork, the warrants, the search warrants, things like that. So that's why I was there.
And you had just become prosecutor, right, Rob?
Right.
You'd been deputy.
I had been the deputy up until January 1st, and that was when I was appointed. My predecessor had retired 1 year, with 1 year left of his term. So just become, at that time, the appointed prosecutor, and then next thing you know, we're going to Hawaii to look for 2 missing kids.
Did you all think they were alive?
Absolutely. At that point, I did. And I think we all did. I think we kind of figured that, there was some strange religious belief, because by then I had spoken with Melanie Pulowski, Boudreaux now. Ian had come in to the police department and kind of gave the background of this whole crazy belief system of zombies and everything that Chad was teaching. And
Melanie Gibb had come in at
Mel-
that
we
point
had
to Arizona
spoken with Melanie.
and had these massive interviews that gave a lot of information.
so we had all that information. We're still looking, and we still believe the kids were alive. Just maybe stashed away somewhere in a bunker or at somebody's house. But I think all of us at that time believed the kids were still alive.
You did, Rob?
I hoped they were alive.
Yeah.
I don't know what I believed at that point.
Right.
You know, I remember the day when we did the search warrants at Lori's apartment. There was just kind of a strange feeling. So, but yeah, like we were absolutely operating as if they were alive. I hope they were alive. Yeah, I mean, we didn't have at that point really any evidence that they weren't.
Right.
So you treat it as if they are and hoped.
So it came out during the trial when they would play these recordings, when Ian was wearing the recording device. Your name was mentioned. They were talking about you.
Right. Yeah, and that was kind of weird to hear your name and to hear them talk about how we're going to get Hermosillo to stop, and kind of being the focus of what they don't want. They don't want me there, and knowing already that I was deemed dark and a zombie kind of played into I wonder if Alex is going to do something. And so, you know, I would tell my family to take different routes home, go around the block a couple times to make sure we weren't being followed. So you know, up until that point, yeah, it was kind of weird to hear yourself being talked about like that.
Were you worried for your safety?
Yeah. I mean, you're always worried for your safety as a cop, right? But when you hear that you're a zombie in this crazy belief system, and you're part of that, and they've labeled you dark, and their job is to, at that point, what we understood was take zombies out. Yeah, I was worried for sure.
You guys think they're alive. You decide you're going to go to Hawaii, but you have to be careful, right? The timing to go over there. Is that what the thought was?
Well, I think once we realized they were there, that plan started moving to get over there fairly quickly. I mean, it may have taken us a little bit of time to get over there, but I mean, fairly quickly. And that's around the same time. I don't know if you were about to say something. Don't want to interrupt you. Having kind of strategy sessions with law enforcement, with other prosecutors in my office, we decided to do a child protection action, and that's one of the main reasons we went over to Hawaii, was to serve that honor and provide her with an order to produce the children. So that there was actually quite a bit of research that went into that.
To try to figure out how you could somehow legally...
Yeah. Like,
and that order said what?
It ordered her to produce her children within 5 days of receipt of the order. And, you know, you can't just, we couldn't just do that to any random person, right? You've got to have a reason. But with the fact that the children were missing, the fact that Chad and Lori were in Hawaii, and we weren't getting tips of the children being in Hawaii, and all the attendant circumstances, we felt like it was justified, and the judge felt like it was justified. And so we got that order to produce the children, which she didn't comply with.
Right. I want to back up. Before you went over there, Alex dies.
Oh yeah.
There's so many things here. So you're in the middle of the investigation. Tammy's exhumed December 11th, I believe. Alex dies December 12th. Do you remember where you were when you found out he died?
Yeah, I was actually in my bedroom talking to Agent Ricky Wright, and we were trying to coordinate doing knock and talks throughout the complex for all the residents that lived in the apartments. And I received a call from Detective Pillar with Gilbert, and he said, "You're never going to believe where I'm at. And he was at the hospital and told me that Alex had died. And I just thought, how can this get any crazier? And I had a sense of relief too, because, you know, the so-called hitman that was doing all these killings, he's gone. So it's a sense of relief. But at the same time, you're like, what else is going to happen? This was all in a span of a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We're finding these things out, from the kids missing to the zombies to Tammy being exhumed. Alex dies. I remember looking at Rob and Ron and like, what is going on? It was crazy.
Well, I remember exactly where I was standing. I was right outside the door to my office, and it's funny, I remember where I was standing. I don't remember who told me that Alex died. It was probably you. But my first thought was like, did they kill him? That was just the first. I just remember the first thought that came to my head. But yeah, and like he said, there's just all this information. It was like drinking from a water hose. A crazy water hose.
A crazy nonstop water hose for 4 years. What do you think about Alex's death?
I mean,
I'll say this, I know Gilbert did a thorough job, and Maricopa did a thorough job on the autopsy, just because they knew all the circumstances surrounding it. So
They want to be very careful.
they wanted to look at everything. When we found out it was natural, you know, it's so crazy. How is that natural? You know, with everything going on. I don't know, maybe it's divine intervention. I don't know. I still don't know. It still is hard to process that was a natural death, in my mind.
yeah. I mean, doing prosecution or law enforcement, you know, you have to follow your evidence, right? And so we know what the evidence of it says. It's a natural death. I think that's a good way to say it, though. It's kind of hard to process it like that, but crazier things have happened.
Well, so there's this twist. He dies. You end up in Hawaii. The order is given to her by the pool. We've seen the video.
Mm-hmm.
And then was it that day or the next day that her and Chad get in the car and they're pulled over by Kauai police and the car is seized? Anyway, it was sometime in that day or
yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And was that the original plan, to have them pulled over there at the resort and take the car, or?
That wasn't the original plan. We were going to do a search warrant there at the residence. And then somebody said they're on the move. We didn't know if they were leaving the island. We didn't know where they were going. And so the decision was made to just put a traffic stop on them. And then, yeah, that's how that kind of kicked off.
Is that the first time you had seen Chad and Lori in person?
No, we had been doing
you had.
surveillance. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, you had. But
Probably for me, but you know, I'm not a cop, so I
Right.
kept my distance. you
Right.
know, but yeah, I think that was the first time I saw them in person.
what was that like, seeing them there? Obviously, you were probably hoping they'd say something.
Yeah, we kind of kept I stayed back and let Kauai PD do their thing.
Right.
We didn't want to get in the way because we were just there observing and assisting them with whatever they needed. So I kind of stayed back, and I think I spoke to you a little bit. But it was odd just to see them kind of just enjoying life and really not a care in the world. They didn't seem concerned. They didn't seem worried that they were going to get into trouble. So it was weird to see them that way. Yeah.
So then she doesn't produce the kids in 5 days. And I remember that day because people were driving by the Department of Health and Welfare, like residents, just slowly driving by to see if she might show up.
Yeah.
Then what do you have? Then you have to plan the next stage.
So yeah, and to me, that is still one of the most, I think, pivotal moments in kind of the history of the case. Yeah, so we're like, what do we do? You know, at that point, we had a potential, the first thought was like, we've got a potential misdemeanor contempt of court. You know, it's going to be hard to extradite someone from Hawaii on a misdemeanor. And I'd gone to a Idaho Prosecuting Attorneys Association meeting, like I think it was a week after. And sitting there with my deputy, Spencer Rammel, not listening at all to the conference because we're just like, what do we do? What's going on? And remember, for some reason, I was looking through jury instructions for something, and I saw the jury instructions for abandonment of a child. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a law. Because it hardly ever gets charged. It's like I've heard a lot of people call it the deadbeat dad statute. And that's generally where you think of it, is a parent who abandons their family, but everybody knows where the family is and they know what the parent is, and they're not providing any type of financial or any other type of support. So those issues usually now get taken care of in family court. But it's a valid statute, still on the books, totally valid. So I go to the statute and I was like, we meet these elements. Like this matches, and it's a felony. And I remember just looking at it and be like, this totally matches up. This is completely an abandonment case if she won't produce those children, because we know they're not with them. We had started getting warrants for finances because maybe these kids are just somewhere else and they're sending the money to take care of them.
Sure.
And so that part of the case, actually, a lot of that finance work got worked out very quickly. Detective Chuck Consitis from Rexburg was on it. FBI Mike Douglas, he was on it. So a lot of that finance work they did really early on in the case regarding the abandonment charges. We still, though, I remember we went over and spoke with the Ada County prosecutor, Jan Bennett, about it. Because it was like, well, at this point, it's a nationwide story. Everybody wants to know where the kids are. And so we wanted to be really careful and do it right.
Right.
But yeah, so that's what we ended up doing. We filed those abandonment charges. And that was, to me, a huge decision. We never file felonies lightly anyway on anybody, but especially this with all the media attention. That was a huge decision for us. But I really do feel like the fact that we did that and then she got arrested and extradited, everyone was already working so hard. But then it was like, okay, now we're going to have a preliminary hearing. We never ended up having a preliminary hearing on that case, but we thought we would. And so everybody just spun up, putting in all this time and effort. And it was really intense. Filing that was, to me, really, really intense.
She's brought back and she appears in court for the first time. But the night before, when everyone's waiting for her to arrive, if you looked outside the window of your office, there's media all over.
Well, I was there that night, and I remember walking out, and there's multiple media vans out there, and
yeah. So then she appears in court, and I've never seen the courthouse like that with that many people, and people started lining up with wear the kids' shirts.
Right.
And it was crazy. I mean, really, there was a definite interest in this. But you all kind of have to be careful to protect your investigation too. We're the ones that are hounding you for information, and we're the ones that are like, come on, tell us more. How do you have that balance with putting that out there, but still I'm at the airport trying to ask her questions?
You know, Nate, we worked nonstop and several different people getting warrants for everything and talking with people in Arizona and the FBI, and so we were kind of worried that something was going to leak out, right? I mean, there's so many people involved, and everybody that was part of that really did a phenomenal job of keeping sensitive material quiet. And so we wanted to give information to the media. We wanted help from the media. But like you said, it's kind of a balance. And that was a case that I had never experienced anything like it, and I know Rob hasn't either, and hopefully we never do again.
Right. No, I mean, my wife got a call from a major news network on her cell phone, and my son, who I think was 16 at the time, he got called by a major news network. It was insane.
Everybody kept the integrity of the case, which was super important.
Yeah.
And I think we did a pretty good job with getting information out, but not too much information.
Yeah. I think the day she came back is when the FBI put out the pictures from Yellowstone, or was that week? Did you all think that maybe something had happened in Yellowstone with the kids up to this point?
Well, go ahead and say it.
You know, we didn't know. We didn't know. I know when she didn't produce the children, that's when a lot of the thoughts of maybe we're going to find these kids alive, I think they kind of shifted. Mm-hmm. Because if she's going to sit in jail over these kids not being there, if it's just a religious thing, you know, if she didn't do like a FaceTime video or some type of proof of life, and she's sitting in jail, there's a reason, because the kids aren't alive. Mm-hmm. So I think that's for law enforcement, a lot of law enforcement, where it shifted.
When we found out she was arrested, we knew they had arrested her. Well, you were there when she was arrested, correct? And my first thought was, I kind of looked at my watch and I was like, 24 hours. If these kids are alive, we're going to know in 24 hours. And it got to 24 hours and I thought maybe 72. And then after that, to me, I just thought, she's not going to sit in jail.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was possible still, and I think everyone still hoped, but the fact that she gets extradited, is going through these proceedings in Idaho, all she had to do at that point to end that case would be produce the kids. And that, the thought shifted.
Meanwhile, Chad's out and moves back to Idaho, and people are sending us tips daily. He bought a new car, or he was at Costa Vida, or things like that. You're keeping an eye on him, I'm sure, but you can't arrest him again at this point. You can't just throw him in jail and say, "Where are the kids?"
Right. He didn't have a legal responsibility for the children. He had no. There was never anything giving him custody over those kids. So.
And we know now that you got to listen to all the phone calls.
Well, not just me, but several of us.
Yeah.
I mean, we were still doing the behind the scenes, getting warrants, talking to people, trying to figure out where these kids are, right? And then we have now Lori's in custody. And so we're still watching Chad. Chad's back, so we're doing surveillance on Chad. And then we have to start listening to phone calls. And they talked multiple times a day. And so for one person just to do that, it was kind of given out to all the investigators.
For a long time they were talking? Because I know you played part of a call.
They spoke, Nate, every day, multiple times a day from the time she was arrested and put in Madison County until the day he was arrested. Mm-hmm. Multiple times a day for hours on end.
But they were careful about what they said.
They were careful. You can tell they were talking in code a lot of time. And so you're trying to figure that out. We're going off the limited knowledge we had for everything. So we're just still at that point trying to figure out what in the heck's going on.
And then are you waiting for evidence to come back too from the FBI, like the cell phone casting and tracking?
Yeah. There's so many warrants out, and it's just that constant gathering. And so I'm trying to think of when we really started looking at the cast report. That wasn't until a bit later. Mm-hmm. At that time, I think we were still hoping to find a device or number or account that had Chad or Lori's geolocation data. But we never found location data for either of them.
For Chad or Lori?
Yeah.
Turned off.
There were a few devices found in that apartment. And so when you write warrants to Google, it takes forever. And so you're waiting for returns, and in the meantime you're doing other things. So yeah, we weren't able to put everything together. We were just getting bits and pieces and trying to put them on boards and papers and spreadsheets. And we knew about all these burner phones and phone numbers, so you're writing warrants to Verizon or AT&T or whoever that phone is through, trying to get something. We never, like Rob said, we never did get anything on Chad or Lori, just Alex.
So at what point do you put it all together and think, okay, it's the backyard by the fire pit and by the tree? I know it came out that Alex obviously pinged there, or his phone was there. Samantha told you all that when you asked about the pet cemetery, I don't remember who testified to this, that she said, oh yeah, it's here in the backyard. Like, how do you put it all together? And do you remember that moment? Was it one moment?
Well, I know for me, when it crystallized, I'd say, is I was actually over at my parents' house. It's like, I think it was the Tuesday after Memorial Day. And I get a call from Ron and Ray saying, we need to meet. We have something urgent. And I don't know why this sticks in my mind. I remember we met in the parking lot, kind of like the Rick B. Andrus law firm. And I was like, why don't we just go to my office? I don't know why.
You were so anxious to tell me this.
And so we go to my office, and what had happened, the real kind of push was Ben Dean, the FBI analyst, who found that the raccoon text from Chad to Tammy. And at that point, I think we reached out to Ricky Wright from the FBI. We knew that he had taken a lot of he had a lot of those geolocation, a lot of that geolocation data mapped. And we were like, where, for the Homer J. Maximus Alex Cox count. So where was he on September 9th? Yeah, and then we confirm, you should really be telling this because you did this work.
I just wanted to give credit to Ben Dean. That was a huge text to find. And a lot of people could have looked right over that.
Because there were 300,000 tests.
Yeah.
I mean, just...
And to Ben's credit, that was huge. And then you couple that with Ricky Wright's work with the geolocations and plotting and dotting every little spot, and then you put those things together. And that's what I wanted to emphasize, is just the amount of investigative work that went into this, and the communication between so many different people is what put that together. If they weren't talking, or if they weren't paying attention to every little detail, I don't know as if we would have ever really found that soon. So there was just so many moving pieces, and for that to happen and kind of put everything together was awesome.
So the raccoon text comes in, you get that, you talk to Samantha, she tells you where the pet cemetery is. And then who makes it?
And the other thing, in the meantime, there was an interview with Ron and Ray. And I was there with Melanie Gibb and David Warwick. And I don't know if they had said it before, but they talked about with JJ, because when we got the September 9th ones, Ricky also sent stuff for the last weekend JJ had been seen. And I remember them talking about Lori saying, well, I sent him with Alex. Sent JJ with Alex. And so at that point we had two spots of interest in the yard, the pet cemetery and over by the tree. And all of that went into that search warrant. And we took, we wanted it to be a really, really solid probable cause affidavit that would withstand any scrutiny. And it was, I think, put a lot of work into that search warrant, the application for it.
And there was a lot of logistics we had to work out. We had people over from Boise for surveillance. We had been planning that warrant for weeks and meeting and, getting the ERT from Salt Lake up for that warrant. There was a lot that went into that, and a lot of sleepless nights, wondering, okay, is this it? Is this where the kids are going to be? You know, where do we go from here if there's nothing? Because at that point, that was where the evidence was showing. And so you're thinking about all that and still trying to do everything. It was a stressful.
It was very,
couple weeks,
very
yeah.
stressful. And I remember having the conversation with you, like, would they have buried them there? And if he had, surely he's moved them by now. I remember thinking that surely, even if he did, hopefully we'll find some evidence of that if that's what happened. But there's until that day, I kept thinking there's no way they'd still be there.
And Nate, we kind of tracked when we were talking about Alex's geolocation. He was all over the place. So I remember going out to the desert with Ron Ball and kind of walking the desert where his phone was, where Alex's phone was. So there was locations everywhere that we were looking. And so we had tracked all these down, walking aimlessly through the desert, just looking for something.
Wow.
And so when we got that, it's like, okay, is it another dry hole, is it another dead end, or is this going to be it? So just the pins and needles of knowing whether this is it or not.
Yeah, and I mean, there were multiple points of data, though, pointing to that. In the meantime, I think they were starting to organize a search to go up through Yellowstone, because that's the last place Tylee had been seen, and so, I mean, there was a lot going on.
So that morning comes, you go to the house, you and several others walked us through in the trial the events of that morning. When you talked with Chad, or when were you first aware that Chad was nervous?
So when we served Chad with the warrant that morning, I remember him sitting on the recliner. His kids are on the couch. Still, it's early, they're eating breakfast. He's sitting in the recliner reading the warrant. And I remember telling Ron, we're going to know real quick if the kids are here based on his facial expressions and his body language when he's reading through this. And it didn't change. And I looked at Ron, I'm like, are we even in the right spot? And I got discouraged, instantly got discouraged, because I was expecting a different response. And it wasn't until he went outside and asked to make a phone call and sat in his car and started looking over his right shoulder towards the pond area that Ron and I kind of looked at each other and said, maybe we're on the right track. So it was a mix of emotions that morning, for sure.
And when the first sign of JJ was found, did word just spread among all the investigators there?
Yeah, everybody in the backyard was kind of doing their own thing that they were tasked to do, and a bunch of us were over under the tree where JJ was found. And once JJ was found, I think everybody kind of stopped working on everything else and came over. And that was when it kind of hit. Yeah, that we had finally found him.
And what about when Tylee was found?
We knew if JJ was there, Tylee was there somewhere. And so, the ERT team did a great job with kind of mapping everything out and sectioning things off. And then when Tylee was finally found, it was, a sense of relief, but a lot of emotion that morning. Yeah.
And meanwhile, you're hearing this. You're hearing that.
So yeah, when the warrant was initially served, I had gone out with everybody first thing in the morning. I just kind of was sitting in my car, and then I started getting phone calls from attorneys. Went back into Rexburg. I had some things I had to do for some other cases that morning. And I was driving back out, and I kind of remember just like kind of just had this feeling like they're gonna find something. And Ron Ball called. He said, I think we found JJ. At that point, they had just barely uncovered the plastic. And so I went out and watched as they uncovered JJ. I mean, that was a really heavy moment. Relieved to know where he is, but
you felt a lot of different emotions.
Yeah.
You felt anger.
Yeah.
You felt relief, confusion. Why would they do this to this little boy?
yeah,
Just so much. But then you have to bury that and still work and still get him out of the ground and still continue throughout the day. And I think that was the hardest for everybody, was still trying to do that, because we all have kids. And when you're faced with that, it's just kind of nobody's ever, I mean, we're trained as police officers, prosecutors, you're going to see that kind of stuff. But when you first see it like that, it kind of hits you. Mm. And then at that point, that's when we were told that Chad was fleeing Emma's house.
Yeah, what did you think then? Where do you think he was going?
I don't think anybody really knew.
yeah. I kind of have an idea, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I can say, because
Right.
I just don't have any. But either way,
He was taken off.
we were told he was driving away very quickly.
Then he's pulled over, but he cooperates. Then he's put in the backseat of the car, and for the first time in his trial, we publicly saw that video. When you caught the phrase, "I'm not coming back," was that like light bulb moment?
We didn't catch that phrase for a while, because we were out there, but it was such a blur. I can't even tell you if that phrase really resonated in my head at that time, because of everything we were dealing with in that backyard.
Yeah, it's not like you run back to the police station or the office and watch the video.
Right.
You've just found two kids, and not only is one, horribly bound and wrapped in plastic, the other, there's not much left. So, what was that process like, in the dirt on a warm summer day, trying to find whatever you can, knowing that this is probably Tylee?
Like I said, you kind of put that in the back of your mind, and it's hard, and a lot of people kind of broke down. For a split second, and then it was back to digging. So that was a hard day.
But only a few minutes at a time because the smell was so bad.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody kind of took their turn. It was horrendous, the smell. I've never smelled anything like it. I've been a cop for 23 years and been on all sorts of different deaths and various states of decomposition. That was terrible.
And meanwhile, you're working to prepare filing
So yeah,
documents.
we
charging
had to
docs?
decide, like, what are we charging right now? We didn't charge murder right away, and I think part of that decision was just like, we know there's still so much information that we either have and haven't been able to review yet, or that's still coming in, and we just wanted to make sure we did it right. But one thing was clear, is that they had concealed evidence, or destroyed evidence. And so that's what we filed. That I think we filed it the next morning. We had 24 hours after Chad had been arrested to file. And I remember, just because of the intense media interest, the fact that it was out that children had been found. I remember the court calling me first thing in the morning, "Where's the filing?" And I was like, "I've still got a couple hours and I want to get it right." So we filed, I think it was a conspiracy to conceal evidence. Mm-hmm. And by the time the first day had ended, we still didn't have most of Tylee, but the forensic anthropologist out there was able to tell us that this is a teenage girl, the parts that they had found. I remember we asked the court to seal the affidavit at the time, because there was some of the details in there now, details that everybody knows, but just we're like, we need to just be careful about this. And we filed that, and I remember having Chad's initial hearing over Zoom while they were finishing out at the property.
Mm. And COVID's happening in the midst of all this.
Yeah, which made everything, was like another layer of strangeness.
Right.
You'd go into work, and there was maybe one other person there, because in our office we were rotating people. We don't get to stop.
Yeah.
But we were trying to comply with guidelines, and so I remember being at work a lot, feeling like it was a ghost town. And that just, having the COVID restrictions in place just made everything probably more difficult, and then just added another layer of strange.
Was it a relief, though, having Chad finally in custody?
Absolutely. It was a relief for me, and I know for law enforcement, you work so hard, and the prosecution team and everybody, this huge team kind of became a family, and everybody worked so hard. And once he was in custody, Lori was in custody, the kids were found. It was, man, we did it. We came together and did it.
But again, the investigation's not over.
Not over.
Now it's really all kind of in your lap.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Yeah. Because these guys, they're the witnesses, and right. We were still just gathering a lot of information. We had the Homer J. Maximus data. We didn't have a cast report yet. There's just, in fact, so the iCloud account, I'm going to go back just a little bit. In March, we had this meeting in Salt Lake with everybody involved in the case, from Arizona on up. And I started on some of these presentations that some law enforcement were doing, like they had these things from the iCloud. I was like, well, I haven't seen this yet. And I don't know if I actually had the iCloud yet and just hadn't dug into it, or...
there was so much information.
But there was so much information, and I was like, I remember that was actually kind of scary, because you start seeing some of the things that are getting said in that iCloud, and it makes it all pretty serious. Yeah, and then just the night before we went out, June 8th was the first time I got a written report from the FBI on the iCloud. And so you're starting to put this all together. And so, yeah, even though we'd found the kids, we still had a lot of work to do to put together the whole case. Mm-hmm. And then we actually wanted to proceed with a grand jury on murder charges that fall. We couldn't pull a grand jury because of COVID.
And you wanted to do the grand jury route rather than preliminary hearing? We
did. Having gone, Chad's preliminary hearing there's a lot of people there.
Yeah.
We wanted to put it in front of a grand jury to kind of see, how do other people see this? Mm-hmm. Because with a preliminary hearing, all you're doing is meeting your elements for a judge.
Right.
and you can get through those usually a lot quicker. We wanted to go through more of the evidence with a grand jury, and do you guys feel the same way? So yeah, that didn't end up happening until May of the next year.
Yeah. Yeah, so then it does happen though, and you announce it. And I think one of the big questions a lot of people have is why did it take so long for it to go, you know, from the 2020 to 2024 with the trial? We know Lori's was in 2023. But it seemed like there were these complications, I guess, that came up, or these delays that came up. Obviously, COVID didn't help.
Right. Well, in a case like this, it's rare that they go to trial quickly.
So you're still monitoring calls between Chad and Lori.
Yeah.
And what was that like? I mean, a lot of people want to hear every detail of those calls. What was in them?
Well, they didn't speak to each other once he was arrested. So us monitoring the phone calls between Chad and Lori was only when she was in custody. He was only really talking to his kids once he was in custody. But the phone calls between Chad and Lori, you heard a couple, right? It was like that every day. It was like two junior high kids wanting to talk and tell each other how much they loved them and sing to each other, and just a bunch of silly nonsense in my opinion. But it was something you had to listen to because you never knew when that little nugget of information was going to come out. They would talk religion, they would talk just about everything. So that's why we had so many people listening, because it was so many calls. But yeah, it was just silly to me listening to that stuff.
How did you decide who split up which witnesses and which evidence? Like even at the trial, some, you all would rotate through questioning of witnesses. Did you each have like an area of the case you were over?
Initially the idea was that Madison was kind of dealing with the kids' portion and Fremont with Tammy, but so much of it is intermeshed. And so there was kind of that, and then just manpower, who was already familiar with specific types of evidence, things like that.
Then it comes time to hopefully have them both go to trial, and it's severed. What was that like, knowing that you have to do this twice?
I was discouraged. I wanted to do it one time. And I know a lot of law enforcement felt like, oh, we're going to go through this whole thing twice. But at the same time, you remember why you're doing it. And so I think, and I can speak for most law enforcement, we would have gone through it 4 times to get justice for JJ, Tylee, and Tammy.
Yeah, felt the same. We would have preferred, we wanted to do it as one case, but that's where it ended up.
Would have been fascinating to see them both in the courtroom if it was one case. Chad and Lori.
It would have been interesting.
Yeah, it would have been really interesting, that dynamic.
Especially too with defense attorneys involved. And yeah, okay, so biggest surprise of the case?
God. I don't even know if I could say what the biggest surprise was.
I couldn't either.
That it happened. I mean, just the whole thing was so just out there. We deal with kind of crazy stories every day. Every day there's something like, oh, that's kind of crazy. I can't believe that person did that. But this was just a whole other level of out there.
It was like you're living a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And you have all these weird things going on, and you hear Chad talking about taking swords out of people's heads and zombies and dead children, and I don't think there was one specific thing that was a surprise. It seemed to me like every time you turned around there was something new, a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, something else happened and it got weirder.
Yeah. Yeah, and even through Lori's trial and then Chad's trial, there were things that would, when you shift your focus, all of a sudden something else sticks out to you. And like the cast data, what we did with cast, what I focused on with the cast witness at Chad's trial was different than at Lori's. I mean, we did some of the same basic stuff, but then, and things would stick out. You're like, you know, I knew that, but it didn't mean as much until you're focused on it. And there is constantly like that with this case, constantly.
Yeah, I would go back and compare as the witness was on the stand, same witnesses, Chad versus Lori, compare my notes to last year. And sometimes they go in the same order, but sometimes it was completely different and different stuff touched on. How did you emotionally and mentally keep it together, especially during the trial when it's so intense? And court may get out at 3:30, but you all have a whole next day to prepare for.
You just do it. You know, you kind of just, no, I mean, it's, for me, I kept thinking back to being deployed and that kind of mindset, like you've got a mission and you do it. And, you know, some days are harder than others. Some days you have more work to prepare for the next couple days than others. I think it's just kind of that, I think everybody who worked on this case, every attorney, all the law enforcement, you just get that mission mindset, like we do what we have to do to complete the mission. So.
Yeah, you're going to see it through. I mean, you've worked so hard in the beginning stages, and here we are at court. And so, like Rob said, you just get that mindset, like we're pushing through. It doesn't matter what happens. Whatever emotions, whatever problems, whatever there is during, we're going to deal with that after. But this is our main focus.
How long did it take you to write your closing arguments and your opening statements, depending on which trial?
I started a lot of what was in my closing argument for Lori's trial started on June 9th of 2020.
Wow.
Not that I was at that moment sitting down and writing, but just, I think for attorneys, a lot of time you start thinking about things like that, like what do you argue to a jury? And then I wrote it, my initial portion of it, probably halfway into a trial, wrote it down and just started refining it. And then, yeah, a lot of that had just been kind of the thoughts going around in my head, preparing for trial, and so.
And then the opening statement with Chad, comparing it to a book and chapters. I thought that was pretty interesting. Did you come up with that idea?
It wasn't my idea.
Oh, okay.
But it was a good idea,
Yeah.
I think. And yeah, I don't want to take credit for what I didn't think of, but I think it was a good idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that one took a bit of time as well. And
So when it comes time to hand it off to the jury, what were you all thinking? Are those intense days? Are those days of relief? Are you anxious?
yeah. To me, I am. And with both cases, I felt like we had presented an overwhelming amount of evidence. I felt like we had done everything we could do. I mean, there's always other things you could do, but at some point you get past your point of diminishing returns, right? And so I just felt like both times I felt like we have presented everything we realistically can in a time frame. And the thought that went through my head both times was, there's no way either Lori or Chad would be acquitted, You know, I wasn't worried about that, but what you never know what a jury will do, and so like, well, is there going to be one person who comes in and hangs this jury, who refuses to, you know, who just won't find them guilty when everybody else does? You know, those were the things that I got concerned about. Would you have someone who did something like that?
Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts? Because you were in the court every day during Lori's trial.
Right, and so I was able to read the jury, I think, or thought I was able to. You kind of see their expression and their emotion when certain things are shown, pictures of J.J. or Tylee. And so being in the courtroom for Lori's trial, I had the anxious feeling. You know, like Rob said, you never know if it's going to be one juror. I remember pacing up and down the halls with Rob at Lori's when we were waiting. I mean, we did, I don't know how many laps we did back and forth,
Geez.
but you're anxious. And with Chad's, I wasn't in there. Detective Kai Kamanu was in there. Or I guess now Chief Deputy Kai Kamanu. So I wasn't privy to seeing that stuff. So I was probably more anxious with Chad's trial than Lori's.
Mm. What type of toll did this have on your families?
You know, your family goes through everything you do. And so, you know, I have a good support system at home with my wife and kids. But yeah, they go through it, they deal with it, they deal with the emotion, they live it. It took a toll, you know. It took a huge toll on family life. You can't go through something like that for 4.5 years and not have it affect your family. Yeah, they just, you can't not help but take this case home with you at night. There's a lot you don't have to, but this case, I think everybody did.
Yeah, it's I'd say the same thing. I don't know if there's really a way to do this case and not have your family be affected by it. Yeah, it's a pretty heavy toll.
I know you both wanted to, and you both have said today, but maybe you want to make a more bigger point about the cooperation between all of the agencies on the law enforcement side and the prosecution side, and bringing in the Attorney General. And is there anything you say about, you know, it seemed like everybody seemed to work really well together. It didn't seem like there was anybody with a huge ego that we saw, at least publicly. What would you say about that?
I would say that's the biggest thing to take away from this case, is that the amount of people that worked on this case behind the scenes that will never be mentioned, names. Mm-hmm. I mean, hundreds of people, 7 different agencies, and like you said, not one ego. Everybody was cooperating, communicating. We became a huge family. We'd go to dinner afterwards. I mean, it was just, we had one goal, and everybody was working towards that one goal. So for me, the biggest thing, the biggest positive thing out of this case was I made a ton of new friendships that will last forever. But I'm super proud of the work that everybody did, and the hard work and dedication. You couldn't ask for a better team of guys and girls to work with.
Yeah, I'd say the exact same thing. I think it goes back to, I mean, this was such a devastating crime, and so people felt driven. And so, yeah, I think there were a lot of times, even if there were differences, it got set aside and people got the job done. And the level of cooperation through different agencies was, and prosecutors' offices, and was just, I've never seen so many people come together with a common goal like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, everybody just, let's get it done, do the job.
What should I have asked you? What do you want to add?
Man, I don't know. That's a good question.
I guess I didn't really touch on the victims' families. Maybe we should probably say something about that.
Yeah.
What was it like working with the victims' families and seeing them there every day in court and knowing that, you know, they're relying on you? It's up to you.
You can't help but feel for them, and
Yeah.
and you know, you can see the pain in their face and feel it, and they were super thankful and really supportive of us, and that made a world of difference. And so when you get that supportive, those supportive hugs, and you know, we're sorry you went through what you went through, coming from the victims' families was huge. And so it makes you even more proud that we did what we did and got the verdicts that we wanted, and the hard work, and it makes everything that we went through worth it for me.
Yeah, I mean, your immediate victims are gone, and those family members are the voice, largely publicly, for the victims, and having their support meant a lot. Even when things didn't go the way we wanted on something, you know, their support was always there, and that was helpful and was really motivating. You know, you want to, not only do you want to get justice for Tylee, JJ, and Tammy, you want to get justice for their families.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I would like to add too, the public support was huge. Just the other day, we had some citizens come into the police department with some kids, and they made signs and brought us cookies and thanking us for the work that we did. So the public was a huge support for us, and that helped a lot to be able to do that and know that they have your back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing your perspective, and great work.
Thank you.
I know it's not something you ever asked for, but you did well, and thank you for sharing, and good having you here.
Thanks.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Nate.